Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Hey Amud Aleph, 6 lines from the bottom. At the end of last time, we learned that Rabbi Avin taught us 2 statements in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. The first statement was that if a person throws an object and it lands in his fellow man's hands, so the thrower is chayiv echatos from meleches hoitzah. And the chiddush is that even though he didn't give importance to the hands that was going to receive the object, because he didn't know whose hands it was going to then be received in, it just fell and landed in his fellow man's hands. But nonetheless, we don't need to say achshavei, because hands have the importance anyways of being a dalid al dalid mokom. Number 2, the chiddush that Rabbi Yochanan taught us was that when a person throws an object and somebody else catches it by remaining stationary, so the thrower is chayiv again. But if the person who caught it has to then uproot from the original place where he was in order to then catch the object, then we say that the thrower only did a akira, whereas the recipient made the hanacha. And therefore it's a case of shnaim sha'asua, and they are both potter for doing this, potter aval aser, this malacha of hoitzah. Now another statement that Rabbi Avin Rabbi Yochanan says, Hahichnis yada l'toy chotzer chaveiroi v'kibel megeshamim v'hoitzi chayav. If a person, he brings his hand into his fellow man's chotzer, and then he takes rain that has fallen into his hand, and then extends his hand out into the Rishus Harabim, so then we say that he's chayiv for the malacha of hoitzah. Maskif l'Rabbi Zeira, mali hitinu chaveiro, mali hitinu shamayim. Ask Rabbi Zeira, the same way that in our Mishnah, when the ani extended his hands inside the Rishus HaYachid, and the Balabayis put an object into the ani's hands, whereby the ani then retracted his hands back into the Rishus HaRabim, we say potter, because after all, the ani did not make an akira, because the balabais put the object in his hand. So too, when the shamayim, when the rain falls onto the hands of the person who extended his hand outside into his friend's chotzer, there wasn't a akira that he should be liable for. Ihu loy avid akira, he did not do an akira. Answers the Gemara, lo tema kibel ella kolat. Don't say that he was mekabel, that he received the rain, but rather that he was kolat, that he collected it, meaning to say that as the rain was falling, so then he slapped the water from his hand onto his other hand, and therefore collected it that way, making an akira. Ask the Gemara, in akira me al gabe makom arba veleka. But we require that the akira be made from a place that is dalid al dalid tfochim. And since he received the water from the air, it doesn't have a space, it's not considered to be a space, a place of dalid al dalid tfochim, that there was the water coming from. Omer Rabbi Chia barei Rav Huna kigon shekolat me al gabe hakoisel. Rabbi Chia barei Rav Huna says that we're talking about a case where he took the water, the rainwater, from a wall. And therefore, the wall is considered to be a makom dalid al dalid, and that's where he made the akira from. Ask the Gemara, al gabe koisel nami, v'holo nach. Even if he took it from the wall, but a wall that is vertical, so the water that is on the wall is going to be going downwards, whereby there wasn't a resting of that water. In order to make an akira, it has to be from the object has to be rested, and here it wasn't resting on the wall. Says the Gemara, Kida Omar Rava Bekoisa Mishupa. Like you have to say what Rava said somewhere else over here as well, that it's a koisa mishupa, hachanami bekoisa mishupa. The wall that we're talking about is a koisa, a wall that is sloped, and therefore it was nach. The water did rest, whereby when he made an akira, he picked up the water, it was a proper akira from the wall. Now the Gemara wants to know, where was the source that Rava said a sloped wall? Ohodisnan, on this, that it teaches the following Mishnah in Erevin. The Mishnah is talking about over there, where a person who was reading from a Sefer, and then the Svarim that they had from Tanakh was always in a scroll form. Just like we have our Torah scroll, all of the books of Tanakh were written in that way. So the Mishnah says over there, the following scenario, Korei b'Sefer, al iskupa, v'nisgalgel ha-sefer miyadoi, golol etzloi. The Mishnah says over there, if a person's reading a sefer, a scroll, on a iskupa. Iskupa is a step that is, let's say, like an extended step outside of a person's doorway, and it is a large enough place where it's more than daled al daled tfachim, at least, and it is elevated above the Rishus Harabim down below the street level. And this iskupa is like a karmelis because it's higher than 3 tfachim, but it's lower than 10 tfachim. So what happened was, while he's reading the sefer, so part of the sefer then left his hand and became dislodged and unraveled and went into the Rishus Harabim. So now he's holding one part of the Sefer in one hand, while the other part of the Sefer is now unraveled in the Rishus Harabim. So the Chachamim were concerned that although over here we're talking about where part of the object was in his hands, and therefore there's no real problem of being moitzi merishus l'rishus, because the object was partially in his hands already, but nonetheless the Chachamim were concerned that if indeed there would be a case where the entire scroll would be in the Rishus Harabim and he would then roll it back, then he would be making a proper akira and hoitzah and a hachnasa into the Rishus HaYachid. So therefore that would be an iser deraisa of hoitzah. So they said that you're not allowed to then unravel, to ravel rather, and golel the sefer back into your hand. However, because over here we're talking about it's a makom that is a karmelis, and he's already holding on to that sefer, so they weren't goizer in iser in this case. So therefore he should roll back the sefer that fell into the Rishus Harabim. That's the reish of the Mishnah. The Mishnah goes on to say, Hayakore beroish hagag, if now he's reading on top of a roof, v'nesgalgil ha-sefer miyado, and the sefer becomes unraveled and leaves from his hand, so he's only holding on to it with the other hand, but the second half of the sefer is now dangling. Ad shelo higia la'asar tfachim, if it hasn't reached asara tfachim, meaning it's still above, higher than 10 tfachim, then it's not considered to be in the Rishus Harabim. Then golo etzlo, then he can go ahead and wind it back in his hand. However, mishiyagia la'asar tfachim, if that scroll does enter the air of 10 tfachim, whereby it's in the Rishus Harabim, then hoifchay al haksav, then the din is that he should leave it where it is in order to minimize the zilzul of the sefer, turn over the words so that the words are not facing the Rishus Harabim, rather the back of the parchment is facing the Rishus Harabim. Ask the Gemara, v'havinam ba, let us delve into this and understand more. Amai hoifchay al haksav, why does he need to then turn around the sefer so that it minimizes the zilzul of the sefer? Ha lo nach, over here the sefer is not nach, it's not resting, thereby he should be able to then bring it back to where he is, since he's not doing an akira. Answers the Gemara, v'amar Rava b'koisel mishupa, because the Mishnah is talking about a koisel mishupa, whereby the part of that scroll is in the Rishus Harabim on a koisel that is sloped. So that's where Rava said his statement. Says the Gemara, Emor da Amar Rava b'sefer da avidenaich. Let us say that Rava only says that statement, that it's a sloped wall, where it's talking about a sefer that's on that wall, because the sefer is able to rest on the wall, and therefore he had to say that ukimta. But mayim mi avide denaichi. But water doesn't stay resting on a wall, even if it's sloped. So therefore, you cannot say that that's the case over here. Elomarova, rather you have to say, what is the situation we're talking about where he took water and made an akira from his friend's chatzar into the Rishus HaRabim? Kigon shekolat me al gabe guma. There was a hole, and on the hole was rainwater, whereby he took some of that rainwater and then he made an akira by picking it up from there. Ask the Gemara, guma pshita, if it's from a hole, so certainly that's poshit that he made an akira. What's the chiddush? He made a hoitzah from the Rishus HaYachid of the chatzar into the Rishus HaRabim. Mao desema, you might say, mayim agabe mayim lav hanachahu kamash malon. You might say that water on top of other water is not considered to be nach. It's not resting on that water, and therefore he didn't make an akira. Kamash malan, it is considered to be an akira, and it is considered to be resting on that water. It's all considered to be miksha achas, one water. V'ozda Rava l'taimei, and Rava goes according to his reasoning. The Amar Rava, mayim agabe mayim, hainu hanachosan. When you have water on top of other water, it's all considered to be one water, and therefore it's considered to be nach, resting. Ego is agabe mayim, lav hainu hanachosan. But if you have a knot on water, that is not considered to be resting. Boy Rava, ego is bikli. If you have a knot in a kli, in a vessel, the kli tzaf al gabi mayim, and the kli is floating on water. How do we look at that egos, at that knot? Basar kli azlinon v'holoi nach naich denayit. Do we say it goes after the kli, and since the kli is not resting, so therefore the egos is also not resting? I skipped. Basar egos azlina v'honaich. Do we say you go after the knot, and therefore since the knot is resting because it's on the kli, and therefore it's considered to be resting, whereby if you picked it up, you could make a akira. Or dilma basar kli azlina v'holanaich denied. Or perhaps no, you say you go after the kli, and since the kli is on the water, and therefore the egos is not considered to be at rest, whereby if you picked up the egos, then you will not be making an akira. The Gemara leaves it as take you an unanswered question. Shemen shetzof agabe yayin machloikes Rabbi Yochanan ben Nur Rabbanon. Here the Gemara brings a case of shemen that is floating on top of wine. And the Gemara wants to determine that there's two different ways of looking at this. Whether the shemen is considered to be part of the yayin, it's all one entity, whereby it's the shemen is nach on the yayin, and if you were to pick up some shemen, you would make an akira. Or no, that the shemen that is floating on the wine is considered to be separate entity, and thereby it's not nach, and an akira would not be made. So the Gemara is now saying that shemen shesav al gabe yayin machlois. They could have brought a case with shemen that was floating on water. That would be the same thing. But since the Mishnah we're about to bring is about a tvul yom, who is touching a yayin, would make it possible. By touching water, wouldn't it make it possible? So we're talking about a case of shemen shesav al gabe yayin. So to machlokes Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri and the Rabbanon, how we look at this. This not, for it says in the Mishnah, shemen shetzaf al gabe yayin. If you have oil that is floating on top of wine, v'noga tvul yom b'shemen loy pasel ela shemen bilvad. Then, if the tvul yom were to touch the shemen, he's only going to be passeling the shemen and not the yayin beneath it, because he looks at the Chacham look at this as if it is two different entities, whereby the shemen is passel and the yayin beneath it is not possible. Just like a knot that floats on the water, the knot is a separate entity than the water. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri omer shneihem mechuborim zeh zelazeh. Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri looks at it differently. He says they're both connected, and therefore, if you were to then pick up and therefore they're both going to be possible. In the case of the Mishnah, when the Tvul Yom touches the Shemen, he's also then touching the Yayin, because it's all one entity, a Miksha Achas. So too, when the water is tzaf on other water, thereby it's considered to be one entity, and therefore it's nach. If a person were to pick up some water, then he would be making an akira. Rabbi Avin, Rabbi Eloi, Rabbi Yochanan, hayaton oichlin umashkin v'nichnas v'yoytze kol hayoim. A new case. Rabbi Avin says in Rabbi Eloi, the name Rabbi Yochanan, if a person were to then have his friend put food or drink on him, and he intended to walk from one corner of the room to another corner, and after he begins walking, he decides that he wants to then walk outside. So it says over here that person who is ton oichlin umashkin v'nichnas v'yoytze kol hayom kula eno chayv asher yamod. He can go in and out of the Rishus Harabim to his Rishus HaYachid back and forth the entire day. He's not going to be chayv until he actually stands still. Omar Abaye v'husha omad lafush. That which we're talking about, that he stands, is talking about where he stands still, he stands at rest. Mimai, from where do we know? Mida Omar Mar, Toich Daler Amois Omad Lafush Potter. If a person is walking in the Rishus HaRabim within Daler Amos, and he stands at rest, so he's Potter because he didn't walk an entire Daler Amos. Lekosef Chayiv. But if he stops only just to readjust himself, the package that he's holding on his shoulders, then he continues walking, then he'll be chayiv for the Dalet Amos, because it's considered to be 4 Amos that he walked at once. But if it's chutz leDalet Amos, it's going to be the opposite. If it's chutz leDalet Amos, omad lafush chayiv. If he walked outside more than Dalet Amos and he stands at rest, so then he's going to be chayiv because he made now a hanocha with the object in his hands. Lekosef potter. But if he, after walking Dalet Amos, he merely just rearranges his package that he's holding, so therefore the standing was not really a resting, he didn't make a hanocha, he would be potter. Ask the Gemara on this whole statement that we began with, my kamash malon, shaloi haisog akir mishor rishon lekach. What is the chiddush here? That there wasn't an akira initially when the person who was laden with the food and drink, when he walked and only intended to go from one corner of the room to the other corner of the room. That's what you're trying to say? That he didn't make an akira? Ha'amra Rabbi Yochanan Chadazimna. Rabbi Yochanan already taught this in another place. The Amr of Safra Rabbi Ami Rabbi Yochanan Hamavir chafotzi mizovis lezovis. If a person walks, he moves with objects from one corner of his room to another corner of his room. V'nimlach aleim, and then he changes his mind. V'hoitzian, and he goes out to the Rishus HaRabim, potter. Shelo haisa akir mishar rishon lekach, because he didn't intend, when he began picking up the object and walking, he didn't intend to go to the Rishus HaRabim, and therefore there was no akira that was made. Says the Gemara, you're right, there was only one statement that Rabbi Yochanan taught that we just quoted, Amoroi ninhu, but it was 2 Amoroim that said in their own language what he said. Mar Omar lo behailishna, Umar Omar lo behailishna. Each one said in his own lashon the statement, the teaching of Rabbi Yochanan, thereby that a person, if he does not have intention to then make an akira when he's now in the Rishus HaYachid, he means only to go to another place in his room, certainly that's not going to be considered to be an akira.